Good evening and welcome to the second session of Day 2, Edition X, Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet. The Last Queen. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni discusses her biography of Rani Jindan in conversation with Malavika Banerjee. Malavika Banerjee is director, Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet, and of course, one who reads 3 books in one day. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni is an award winning and best selling author, poet, activist, and teacher of writing. Her work has been published in over 50 magazines and translated into over 29 languages. She loves to connect with readers on her Facebook page and on Twitter, and we will be welcoming questions from those of you who have logged in today once the session is over. Over to you, Malavika.
Hi, Chitra. Hi.
Hello.
Good morning to you from a very nice and cool evening in Kolkata.
Very nice to see you and hear from you, and at least virtually to be in Kolkata. You know, it is always such a joy to come to your festival. And as we were discussing, every time, the last 2 times, it was so nice to do this in person because, of course, Kolkata is the city of my birth. But I am happy to do this virtually, and I'm thankful that we can do this.
That's fantastic. This is our third book launch at the festival with you. So before we get into it and get into this magnificent story that you have told, I thought we should both hold a box and do a launch. Yes. So I don't know whether, yes, this is the right way to do it. Yeah. So many congratulations for the book. And I hope that we can give a little preview or an appetizer to the book in this session.
Yes, I would love to do that.
All right. So would you like to start with a reading because, or would you like to first get into the session and then do the reading?
Let's get into the session. Let's give people a bit of an idea of this novel, which is a real departure for me, as you know. This is my first historical novel for adult readers. So, yes, let's talk a little bit about it, and then I'd love to read a passage.
Yes. So, I have thought about this session is to first talk about this magnificent story that you've told with its characters and then about the writing of it. So, so that we cover both because they're both very interesting aspects in their own ways. So, Rani Jindan, how did she come to you? When did you read about her? What exactly drew you to her? The book is called The Last Queen, and it's about this magnificent character who is so beautifully, fleshed and blooded out. So, how did Rani Jindan come to you?
Well, this story will be of particular interest to you because Rani Jinda came to me at KLM in the literary meet when I was there last year, or the last time I was here for the launch of The Forest of Enchantments. I came into the meet early because I wanted to hear some of the other writers. And just as I sat down in the auditorium, in your beautiful open air auditorium at Victoria Memorial, I saw this picture on the screen because Anita Anand and William Dalrymple were doing an event about their book, Kohinoor. But they were just at the section where, after the Kohinoor, it's many, many adventures. It comes to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and then it's passed down to Maharaja Dalip Singh. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh is the husband of Rani Jinda, and Maharaja Dalip Singh is the son. And when the kingdom is wrested away from the boy king, Dalip Singh, the Kohinoor is taken away to England. But what makes it worse is he is also wrested away from his mother, and he also ends up as an exile in England for many years, and they're separated. And then he comes back. And in fact, this story has so many connections to Kolkata because
Yes.
the British have been very careful about keeping the mother and son apart because she is so fiery and she loves him so much, and she had put her whole life into being queen regent so that he could rule. She wanted to make sure everything was safe until he became old enough to rule, but that didn't happen. Anyway, she is in exile by this time in Nepal. He comes back to India on the pretext of going for a tiger hunt, and they meet in Kolkata. So he sends a word to her in Nepal. She comes down to Kolkata. He comes to Kolkata, and they meet at the historic Spence's Hotel. But when I entered that auditorium and I looked at her picture, this is a painting that she will go back with him to England, even though she does not wish to. She hates the British for what they have done to her, but she loves her son more. So he will take her back, and he will get this oil painting commissioned. And
Yes.
so it's one of the few images we have of Rani Jindan, and it was up on the screen. And Anita Anand was telling this story, and I was so touched by the story of this fierce mother who had done so much to fight the British and to keep her son in power, but whose story is tragic because of many, disloyalties within her own court. She fails. She fails to do this. There are traitors within her own court. And when I saw her picture, all of that seemed to come at me. This woman's story, her feelings, her strength of character, her fate, and yet also the fact that she doesn't give up. And I won't go into it right now, but she will, in the end, in my opinion, she will win over the British in a very interesting way. But I saw that image and I was hooked. I was like, I have to find out more about her. How is it I don't know about her? We know about her husband, the great Maharaja Ranjit Singh. We know about the son, the tragic Dalip Singh, who loses his kingdom, who loses his sense of identity, everything. But of course, as is common in many historical tales or even in our mythology, the women are not always in the picture. The women are pushed over to the side. So that what most people knew about Jinda is she was very beautiful, and she was the daughter of the fortress's kennel keeper, and she became the queen, the last queen, the final queen of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and she was the mother of Dalip Singh. That's about anything people knew. I had to dig really hard to get more facts, but I am so delighted. So I really have to thank you at KLM for the genesis, the birth of
Yes,
this
that's
novel.
fantastic. And of course, the Kolkata Literary Meet is delighted to be the catalyst, but it's also quite fitting that at the Victoria Memorial, you discovered this queen, this other queen who fought so passionately and committedly against against Queen Victoria. So,
Against Queen Victoria, because actually she felt that Queen Victoria, apart from everything else she had stolen, was stealing her son away from her. Because Queen Victoria, Dalip was just a little boy. He was just a teenager when he goes to, not even a teenager, he's really young when he goes to England, right? And he is awestruck by the glamour of the British court. So, in some ways, yes, Queen Victoria was stealing her son, and
yeah.
Maharani Jindan was like, "No, I will take him back."
Absolutely. So that happens later in your novel, and to just go back a little, into the start of where you start the story after the prologue, which you're going to read, is of this young innocent girl, village girl, who was intelligent, who was beautiful, but from a very, very humble, underprivileged background. And you cover the story as a kind of, there's an age of innocence, and then the slow unraveling of that, and so she then becomes this queen who can manage the intrigues in the zanana, and then she becomes this mother of the Khalsa and the regent, and actually kind of sometimes outmaneuvers the darbar and all the punches and the Khalsa chiefs to get her way. So this tracing of her loss of innocence, or should we say her emergence as a woman who can outmaneuver a largely male-dominated space. Did
Very, very male
how,
dominated.
how do you like recreating that world? Because a novel, a historical novel, fleshes out the character in a way that Anita's book is fantastic. The second half of William Dalrymple and Anita Anand's book is very largely about the phase you mentioned in the second half of the book. But the first half of your story, how did you kind of imagine those parts?
Yeah, as I was saying, writing a historical novel was different for me, and it was a new kind of challenge because I had to stay and I wanted to stay very close to facts. I did not want to change any of the facts that were available. Not that there were that many, but there was enough to create that arc that you just talked about. And I wanted to be accurate, but being a novelist, I was very interested in those unspoken spaces, in those dark spaces of her life that were like they were just not known. How did she become from being from such a humble background, being the kennel keeper's daughter? How did she become a queen? Very unusual in that time. What did Maharaja Ranjit Singh see in uh, the little girl, the young girl, the 16-year-old that was Ginda, to want to marry her, not just make her into a concubine? Yes, she was very beautiful. He would have wanted that. But there must have been something in her character that made him say, no, you will be my queen. You will be my last queen. I don't want any other women after you. So those were the spaces I was able to explore. So what was a curse, which is not much was known about her, became a blessing, because then I was free to imagine those spaces that nobody knew anything about, that have been lost in time. So what went on in the Zanana after she's married and she comes back, now she's 18 years old, and everybody except maybe one queen, everybody hates her because she is the new favorite and she came from such a humble background. They at once look down on her and they hate her. There are many plots against her. How does she overcome those? So I had I had lots of fun imagining just the little details of, this kind of woman to woman fight that went on in the Zanana, that she was able to maneuver around very cleverly and win.
Yes. So that's the first level of, it's almost like she kept overcoming obstacles. She had to marry a sword because Maharaja Ranjit Singh couldn't come to marry her. So she had
Right.
to symbolically marry a sword and come in the dead of night instead of having a grand entry into the palace. So, were these details that you found, or how did you go about, ferreting out these details from, your source material?
So there's a lot written about Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and that was the way that I kind of went at it, kind of diagonally through him. So in the information that we find from him, there were just these two lines that he sent his sword to the village. So he had met Jinda and he had said to her, "You're too young, go back to the village. I promise I will marry you." So she's waiting now in the village and he sends the sword. So this comes out of one line in his biography. He sends the sword to the village Gurjanwala, and then she marries the sword and comes back. So then I was imagining, well, why wouldn't he go? Or why wouldn't he have her brought in great pomp, with great pomp and splendor? Well, then I'm putting things together. That's the time when he has to be with the British, and they are really negotiating, what happens to a very important strategic city. And he has to be there because he had to do a lot of like negotiation with the British, who were dead set on taking Punjab. That was the last and biggest empire at that time in India, the last and biggest kingdom. They wanted that. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh was like, no, you're not going to get that from me. So he had to be there on his political mission, but he also loved Jinnah. He didn't want her to wait anymore. So he sends the sword. So, I had to piece together different things that were going on at the same time and make the connections.
Fantastic. So, staying with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, we read about him in history, and you've beautifully woven his famous line about how the British will rule everything eventually. Sab lal ho jayega. So, that line does appear twice in the novel as well. So, his presence in the story, before you do your reading, I think this would be a good time to, wait for that reading, because Maharaja Ranjit Singh remains a presence right through the story. At some point, she is the man he is the man she loves. At some point, she is empowered by his special fondness for her. And when he's gone, it's what he says or what would he do at this situation, in this situation, that somehow guides her. It's almost like a voice of conscience. So his presence in the novel is something that's very fascinating and beautifully, woven into the narrative of his young queen. So this would be a great time for you to read the part about his passing and his last moments.
Yes, I will. I will start with that, and that is actually the prologue, because I felt that was a dramatic moment to start Jinda's story, because it is a moment that's going to change her life from being the favorite queen and the mother of his favorite youngest son. She's suddenly going to be without a protector in a court, which is now going to be ruled by his eldest son, Karak Singh, whose mother absolutely hates Jinnah because she used to be the most powerful and influential queen before Jinnah came into the picture. And you are right, Maharaja Ranjit Singh remains in her life after he passes away. She thinks of him often, as I felt that would be psychologically accurate. He was, he was the transformative force in her life. He taught her pretty much everything that she knew about being a queen. And he spent a lot of time, or she spent a lot of time with him whenever he was in Lahore. And she was, at this point, she's the favorite queen. She is the one he calls for. And so he would have discussed, and this part is my imagination, but I think it would be psychologically accurate, that, and especially because she's so intelligent and she's very interested in Punjab, the state of the kingdom, he would have discussed a lot of policy with her. He would have told her, and he knew he could trust her like 100%. So he would have told her about his frustrations. He would have told her about his policy. I think by then he knew he was not well. He knew he would pass away. He gave her some ammunition with which she could protect herself and her son after he was gone. So, and she remembered all that. So, at key moments, when, especially early, when the courtiers are floundering, she recalls what Maharaja Ranjit Singh said to her, and she says those things, and they are like, wow, it is like the Sarkar is speaking through you. And in a way, he is. So, yes. So I will start here with Maharaja Ranjit Singh is very ill at this point, and everybody now is afraid that this is it. He has had a number of strokes before this, but people think this is it. This is the last one. So Jinda and the other queens are sent away from the room where the palace room where he is lying, and Karak Singh is brought in, and the king puts the tika on his forehead, and Jinda comes back to her home, and so we see her character in this little part that I'm going to read. She is not going to give up. That is her nature. She is going to fight till the last moment. Okay, so she comes back. She loves this house, this haveli that the king has built for her. It's called My Jindan Haveli, and her baby is waiting there, and her very favorite maid, very loyal maid Mangla, who becomes a big character in this, and who is also only in little parts in history, but she is there throughout the life of Jinda. So, and Mangla says, please eat something here. She's still breastfeeding Dalip. Dalip is hungry. She's like, I can't do any of that. I can't eat. I can't focus on Dalip. You take care of him. I have something else to do. Eat something, Mangla begs. You haven't eaten since yesterday. At least drink a little buttermilk. I made it the way you like, with salt and crushed mint. Jinda is touched by Mangla's concern, but she can't. She must stay focused. She must carry out the resolution which came to her when she was sent away from the Sarkar's chamber. In her bedroom, she takes her thick braid and knots it to one of the bars of the window. This way, if she nods off, she'll be jerked awake. Her plan is to stand at the window all night, facing the samadhi of Jingir Shah. He was a great saint, the protector of the Killa. His spirit still resides in his tomb. When Dalip had the bloody flux, she fasted and prayed there for 24 hours, and the next morning her baby opened his eyes and smiled at her. She'll beg the saint for his blessing all night. Tomorrow the Sarkar will be better. She tightens the knot to make sure it won't come loose. She faces the samadhi and clasps her hands so hard the skin turns white. She feels the prayer pulsing in her belly. If Jinnah wants something badly enough, she can make it happen. She believes this completely. Isn't every major event in her life, all 21 years of it, proof of this? How else can she, a girl from a no name family on the outskirts of a small town, end up in Lahore, city of emperors? How else could she possess a Haveli in the heart of this fortress textured by centuries of history? How else could she, the daughter of a dog trainer, become the Sarkar's favorite queen? How else could she give him what many of his wives, though they were married to him in his prime, failed to produce? A son to delight his old age. She is about to learn how wrong she is.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So, yes, so there is the story of her amazing meteoric rise from, her humble beginnings to being the last and the most beloved queen of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. But once that shadow passes from her life, there is an emergence of another woman who is smart, who thinks on her feet, and is in many ways what we in the 21st century call almost an alpha woman. And her ability to, how she empowers herself with the very tools that are meant to subjugate the women and keep them in the zanana. So she throws off her veil to face her army, thereby making them her family and her the mother of the Khalsa. And even earlier on, to prove that she is a woman of virtue and she did have the pox. So these ways in which she subverts all that's meant to control women is a very fascinating underlying thread through the story. So was that conscious or was that the story itself?
Well, again, the facts are all taken from history. So she is a woman who will dispense with the veil, which is very unusual, at least at the Lahore court at that time. That was not the case. So as and she is, just as you said, she is so intelligent. She uses what has been used to subjugate women to escape from that tyranny. So she uses the veil, right? She realizes the power of the veil, and she throws it off dramatically at a moment in court, and then with the Khalsa army, that is going to be most effective. So she was, she understood drama. She used drama for that purpose, and it wins the Khalsa army over. Like you said, they call her mother, my mother of the Khalsa, and they are they're very loyal to her. And they are the reason, especially in the beginning when the court is against her, the wazir wants to take the power from her. Really, what they want is they will put Maharaja Dalip Singh, who's just a boy, he's like 6 years old. They're going to put him on the throne, but they're going to be the real rulers. And she's like, you're not going to manipulate my son for your purposes. So she will throw off the veil in open court. She will decide, she will insist on sitting there. And once they begin to see how she is as though channeling the spirit of Maharaja Ranjit Singh through her, they will become much more respectful of her. So she wrests respect from people who are determined in the beginning not to give it to her. They just think, she's just about maybe 25, 26 at this time. She's so young, but she is determined. And I think one of the things that makes her so determined is her mother love, which is a really important quality that keeps coming up in Ginda.
That's beautifully put, because that fascinated me, as did the other. When we think of characters like Lakshmi Bai and Ahalya Bai Holkar from an earlier part of history, they're seen as these absolutely pristine women who, were married to, especially in Lakshmi Bai's case, to a much older king, early widowhood, and that there is silence about their, desire to have a life. And there's this beautiful part in the novel where she does decide to take a lover. And so what were those parts? Where did you get that source material? So that kind of gave her, the character in the novel, a sense of being just not all white, just not a loyal queen and a fierce mother, but at some point a woman who had needs, who had insecurities, and who had the courage to address all those parts of her personality.
Right, right. And that was a very challenging part to write, because one of the things I wanted to make sure I did in The Last Queen was not to paint Jinda as what she was not. So I didn't want to make her into, a cardboard figure, a saintly cardboard figure. She was a very dramatic woman. She was, she had strong likes, dislikes, love. And yes, she had been widowed since she was 21 years old. And as she herself says to her faithful retainers, she has two faithful retainers. One is Mangla, that I already mentioned, who's been with her ever since her early days in the Killa. One is Avtar, who is her spy master. And then, of course, her brother Jauhar. And when she falls in love with Raja Lal Singh, who is a courtier, and for a while she resists, but then she gives into her love for him. Now there is no opportunity for her to marry him, because she knows that if she marries him, immediately she cannot be queen regent anymore, and her son will be at the mercy of the wazir and his cronies. So that part is not open to her. So she asks her brother and her, faithful retainers, am I just supposed to be lonely all my life? Is that, none of the kings are asked to do that. Maharaja Ranjit Singh had so many queens, nobody, and concubines and dancing girls, nobody said anything. And I just want one person whom I love to spend my life with. But she realizes that that will not be allowed to her. So she's as discreet as she can be. But of course, it is found out, and then, it is used against her. It's very tragic the way that it is used against her, and that even Lal Singh will ultimately turn against her because he keeps saying, marry me. He keeps saying, why don't you give up the kingdom? Marry me. I have enough money. We will live somewhere safely. Dalip will have a good, normal childhood and life. And she says, I can't do that. And that line, was very resonant to me. She says, I am Rani Jinda. I am the mother of the Khalsa. This is my fate. I cannot move away from it. So she has to give up that opportunity for personal happiness for the sake of her son and for the kingdom.
So yes, that scene is. I was just I thought I should tell you to use that, but you chose the other one. But Lal Singh's character, the Wazir. There are many characters who are beautifully fleshed out and add to the story, other than the three main protagonists of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and Rani Jindan and Dalip Singh. So the role of the Dogras and the Kashmir King and Jung the king in Nepal, Jang Bahadur. How did you, were there different source materials? Because now I think we can segue into the second half of the writing of the book. So
Yes.
how did you flesh out those parts? That there were ancillary characters who were very critical to the way history unfolded.
Yes. Well, there are many books that deal with what is called the rise and fall of the Sikh empire. And in fact, there are many books that really focused on that. And they're called like The Fall of the Sikh Empire, The Sunset of the Sikh Empire. There are biographies of Ranjit Singh. There are a number of books by the late Khushwant Singh that I found very helpful. So all of them give me everything that happened in terms of court intrigue. They don't focus on Rani Jinda's character, but they talk about the growing tension between her and her courtiers, the growing power of the Khalsa army, who, at this point, the Khalsa army is very interesting because they are such a powerful force, and they are so pure, which, their name shows. And they were like 100% loyal to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. But they require a strong hand on the reins. Otherwise, they want to be in power. And Maharani Jinda at a certain point is like, no, I cannot allow the Khalsa to lead my life for me. They can't tell me what to do, because she's also very strong-willed. And in fact, there are historical accounts of this. The Khalsa find out that Lal Singh is her lover. And although his last name is Singh, as was the case with many men at that time, he is not Sikh. And that is not okay with them. So they come to her and they actually make, her a very good offer. I thought from their side, they see this as like an excellent offer. And there is an account, there are accounts of this, although some of the conversation I have imagined, they say, we realize you are young and you need someone to love. And we are going to, if you marry one of the Sikh leaders of the kingdom, we are okay with it. And I mean, they feel like they're making a big exception for her. You can marry any of the Sikh leaders. Here, we'll even give you a list of names you can choose from. And she's like, oh, really? She's very smart. So she's not going to anger them face to face, but she is furious. She's like, how dare you tell me how to live my personal life? And that's when things begin to break. Actually, things begin to break a little earlier, because for reasons that we won't go into, perhaps, the Khalsa end up killing her very dear brother, Jawahar Singh. And let's be honest, Jawahar deserves it, but she is heartbroken. She is like devastated. he has been her protector in her childhood when she had, a very rough life. She has
Yes.
loved him. So when she became queen regent, she invited him to come and be at her court, and now he's killed by the Khalsa army. So that really sours the relationship between her and the Khalsa
Yes,
army.
and in many ways, later in life, she regrets having, in the last war with the British, making them cross the Sutlej when, she knew and it made sense for them to have been on this side of the bank, but she pretty much drove them to the ruination, and that's a regret she has later. So, while dealing with the novel, the story which is woven around this magnificent queen, you have been very upfront with the mistakes she made, whether it is bringing her brother, who is a loving brother but a hot-headed man, into the
Yes,
role of Wazir, to what she did to the Khalsa, to the mistakes she made in trying to take on the British by refusing to let her son put a tikka. So all the mistakes do come back to haunt her, and you really shown her as a woman who's as capable. She's a woman of passion. What is your assessment of her eventually, after spending 2 years with her?
yes, I think it's exactly that. And I wanted to show her in all of her humanness. I think every once in a while we see this thread, and perhaps it is all over the world. But since we're discussing Indian history and culture, it's certainly there in India, where we feel that in order to admire a woman, she has to be portrayed as perfect, and she cannot have any human flaws. I mean, come on, she is a human woman. She is going to have some flaws. She can be admired in spite of her flaws. She can be loved by us, and I hope by me, the creator of this book, but also definitely by the readers because of her humanness, right? So I have never been one to hide the flaws of my women characters. It's the same in the Palace of Illusions. I hope I showed Draupadi and all her, you know, fiery hot-headedness. Draupadi makes a lot of mistakes too. Even Sita, whom people have loved to portray as meek and mild and just putting up with things that happen to her. That's not her real nature. She stands up and says things like they are in quite a few instances. And I have shown those in The Forest of Enchantments. Same in The Last Queen. I wanted to show the reality of Jinda's life. And I wanted to say, here is a strong woman, here is an intelligent woman, see what she achieved. And yes, she has flaws, she has weaknesses. Which one of us doesn't? Who
Absolutely.
doesn't have them?
So then we have this perfectly beautiful and completely dark history of the Kohinoor that runs it twinkles in and out of the story. And it is what now I realize brought me to Rani Jindan, the book on the Kohinoor. So, the part of the book where Dali says how he let go of the Kohinoor. The last part of the book is hugely historical, and there's less imagination and more fact. So, what is your thought on the way the Kohinoor has played its part in this story? I just read a book apart from the book that inspired you, where Dalhousie says that the Kohinoor has become in the lapse of ages a sort of historical emblem of the conquest of India. This is from the foreword to Vidhi Dalrymple and Anita Anand's book. So, a bit about how the Kohinoor is part of this story as well, because it's a diamond that somehow mesmerizes us Indians even to this day.
Yes, well, it is the most famous diamond in the world, right? And yes, because it has a tragic history. Interestingly, until Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who is known as the Sarkar in this book, because that's how his people loved to refer to him, and Jinda does too, uh, until Maharaja Ranjit Singh manages to get it from the Afghans. And there's a whole story there. I won't go into it, but he manages to get it. because the Afghan king needs his protection. Until then, the Kohinoor has brought bad luck to everyone. Now, somehow with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, this changes. And he is able to, and he wore the Kohinoor from that time on his arm as a symbol of the power of the kingdom of Punjab. Now, what I loved, one of the things I loved as I was researching this book is Maharaja Ranjit Singh's character. He was so powerful, but he was so simple. He was so intelligent, although he never had a formal education, he could not read or write. I mean, when I understood that, I was amazed that a man who had no formal education, could not read or write, knew exactly what was going on in India, everywhere, what the British were doing. He could see through their strategy of divide and conquer. He mentions it several times, but no one is listening to him. His son, who becomes Maharaja after him, Kharak Singh, is just not a strong ruler, and he is swayed this way and that by his favorites. So, the Kohinoor then becomes, once Maharaja Ranjit Singh has passed, and this is a fact that when he is dying, he wants to donate the Kohinoor. He wants to give it to Jagannath Temple in Puri. And we don't know why. We don't know exactly why. Is he giving it so that Lord Jagannath will bless him with more life? Is he giving it because he feels that this diamond can't be handled, that the power of the negative power of the diamond is too strong, it'll destroy his family? We don't know, because he's very ill at this point. But we do know that the wazir and the prince and all of them, they're like, yes, we'll do it, but they don't do it. They don't want to lose that diamond. Anyway, that diamond comes, it is taken on by his descendants, and one by one, they are all destroyed within like the next 5 years. Yes. They die from various causes, from accidents, from plots, from being by being murdered. It's just amazing. I mean, if it wasn't in history, you wouldn't have believed it. Yes. You would have said, what is this thing you're making up? It's so interesting. And then it comes to Maharaja Dalip Singh, and Ginda, who's seen all of this, who has heard of the story, she's not happy about this diamond. She's like, I don't want the bad luck of this diamond to affect my son. But if we believe in such things, we can say it does. And then it ends up as one of the things that Dalhousie takes. And he takes it to England, he gives it to Queen Victoria, who, in ironic symbolism perhaps, cuts it down to a smaller size. So she kind of cuts it and controls it, and she puts it in her crown. So, and the thing is, at that point, Dalip Singh is so young. When he loses his kingdom, he's like 6 years old. He doesn't understand any of this. Even when he goes to England, he doesn't understand any of this. He's just a teenager, and a very sheltered teenager. And he has been brought up now ever since he lost the kingdom. He's separated from his mother. She is put into high security prisons, each one more high security and farther away from Punjab. And he has no one to advise him. So there's a scene which is true. And the reason you know more about the history is that after he goes to England, there's a lot of documentation of what goes on with him, though there's less documentation about what is happening to his mother. But we know that she escapes amazingly from the British prison. There's a whole story there. And again, if it wasn't in history, you wouldn't believe me if I just put it into the book. But fortunately, it is well documented. But so there's a scene where the queen gives him this diamond to hold, the Kohinoor, and that's the last time he holds it. And then he gives it back to her. And it's such a sad scene, because you see how mentally they have conquered him. They have, I don't know, they have colonized him to think that this is my queen. He's forgotten that I am a king. He's forgotten that. Yeah. In fact, she loved to have him called Victoria's Black Prince. And
Yes.
that was just so demeaning, I felt. That part got me quite angry as I was writing the
It's
story of their lives in England.
is a story that makes everyone very angry. I mean, it's like the king of Burma coming to Ratnagiri or Bahadur Shah Zafar's end in Burma. But this is somehow even more poignant because he was so young when the British decided to take him away.
And
There
they
are
took
lots.
everything. They took away his religion also because they put him in, when he was little, they removed other people from his life. And his closest attendant for a number of years was this convert. And he just talked to him about Christianity and he was converted. But that's not the end of the story. And
It's
that's
very,
Jinda's final
yes.
triumph.
Absolutely. So we won't get into that because firstly there are lots of questions and we must leave it for the readers as well. Because it is a triumph in the end. It is a triumph of the spirit of Rani Jindan. So there is a question about your source material. Sorojesh Mukherjee is asking, did you have to look at any primary sources? If so, what were these books and how can one access them?
Okay, yes, I did look at primary sources, and accessing books was really difficult, especially towards the end because we were already in pandemic, right? In fact, fairly early in the writing of the novel, we were already in pandemic. Luckily, I had gotten a lot of books by then. So I would say that the primary sources that were very useful for me were number one, the letters written by Queen Ginda, because she wrote a lot of letters when the British put her in prison. They took away all her resources, they took away her money. They had, when Punjab was being made into a protectorate, she was supposed to get a huge chunk of money every year. That was supposed to be what they promised her. And they did not do that. Then Punjab gets annexed completely illegally. It was a protectorate. How can they just annex it? And then they reduce the amount even more. And what's worse, they don't even give her that. So her allowance is reduced, reduced, reduced. Now she's put in prison. But she has some very faithful spies who manage to get in there. And so she is able to send these letters. So she sends letters to the Queen, she sends letters to the Governor General, but nothing happens with those letters. Frankly, I don't even know if the Queen ever gets them because, the middlemen just suppress the letters, but she is able to publish it in the Punjab papers through the help of her attendants. Secretly, they get it to the papers, and they are published in Punjabi, and people get to know it. So her letters were a very big source of my sources of, especially this latter part of her history. There are other sources like Shah Bahadur's Jangnama, which talks about the war very soon after it happens. So he gives us a lot of details of the first Anglo-Sikh War and the second one as well. So that was an important primary source for me. And then, interestingly, the British wrote letters to each other, and some of those were preserved, which shows, ironically, how evil they were. Okay, so they create this smear campaign against her. They're like, her people love her too much. Her people respect her too much. There are uprisings because she's been put in prison. We have to destroy her character. So they create this huge smear campaign which shows her as this, woman with no morals, a lover here, lover there, all kinds of orgies going on in the palace. And they just publicize all this. They call her the Messalina of the Punjab, it is so ironic, right? I don't think they managed to really turn all of the people against her, but some of the people outside of the kingdom, they're like, okay, we don't want anything to do with this. So we have accounts of that. And then one of my biggest sources, again, ironically, are the guardians of Prince Dali. So when Rani Jinda is put in prison, this English couple is given Prince Dalip to bring up, and they become his guardians, Lord and Lady Logan. And Lady Logan is she's an addictive diary writer. So there's lots of diary entries about that time. She talks about Ginda. She talks about Dali. She talks about, how wonderfully they're bringing up this prince and how they're turning him from the heathen religion of Sikhism to the real religion of Christianity. Oh, there's lots and lots. And after she goes to England with him, she continues writing. So that becomes a big source as well, among others.
So there's another question, which is an interesting one, but you'll have to answer it shortly.
Can I just say one other thing? The other thing that really helped me was paintings and photographs. And I think of those as primary visual sources as well, because I couldn't go anywhere in person to see these places where Ginda had grown up and where Ginda lived. And, I couldn't even go to Spencer's Hotel, which I would have loved to do. I mean, some of those places are not there anymore, but the photographs were there. And they gave me such a powerful visual image of the place, the atmosphere, how things were at that time. So that became a very important primary source.
All right. Now there's a difficult question coming up, and we don't have much time with Amitav Ghosh waiting in the wings. So the question is, who was more difficult to reimagine, Draupadi, Sita, or Rani Jindan? This is from Rituparna Roy.
Okay, that's a great question and a difficult one. It's kind of like when people ask me now, which of your children are your favorites? So I'm going to say that, and this is true, I'm not just saying it, they were each a challenge in their own way. And they were each a different kind of challenge, but at the bottom, the challenge was the same, which was, how do I bring these women alive, these women who have either been misinterpreted by posterity or forgotten by posterity? How do I try to tell their whole story as honestly as I can through my understanding, my analysis and understanding of whatever source material there is? So, a number of Mahabharats, a number of Ramayans, and then all of these sources that we just talked about. I took them and I tried to do the best job I could using truth and imagination, kind of balancing those two things.
Okay. So I think we are pretty much at the ahead of 1 hour. So one question has come from Chakori, which is very sad, which is, how do I get my book autographed by you?
Well, what I would say to Chakori and all of my readers, my loyal readers, because of whom I just found out The Last Queen is #1 fiction bestseller in all the crossword bookstores in the country. And thank you, people. I couldn't do this without your great support. And thank you to people like Malavika who's putting me on the air to have a conversation with my readers, even though they're not here. Just hold on to your book. I'm sure I will be coming to Kolkata. I'm sure I will be coming to a future KLM, and I will be happy to sign the book then.
Yes, next year, this time, I'm having a vision that you'll be in Victoria, smiling gloriously and signing books. So yes, if there are questions, I'm sorry I can't take all of them. Maybe I'll just mail them to Chitra and get you all answers and put it on Facebook. But
yes,
thanks.
And they can write to my Facebook page directly. This is a really busy time, as you can understand, but I will get to them as soon as I can. And I really appreciate, I love hearing from readers. So
yes. And we love hearing from you, Chitra. And as I said, it's an absolute delight for us at the festival that you are so warm and ready to join us either in person or across the sea, Sat Samandar Par, whenever we've asked you to do so. And may you continue empowering and reimagining some of the most amazing women from myth, from history, and from other stories, because that's how we get to know them. That's how we get to understand that women have many parts. They're not saintly. They are not pure white. There are many shades, and it's women like you, Chitra, who makes it possible for us to enjoy every shade and every nuance of their character. Do pick up The Last Queen. It is a fantastic read. I read it very slowly, but it was so wonderful. I wanted to ask questions and know every bit of it. But it's a very, very easy and wonderfully crafted novel. So thank you, Chitra. Stay safe, stay well, and on the other side of this miserable pandemic, we shall meet.
We
Thank you.
shall meet again. Thank you, Malavika. It's always such a pleasure to speak with you and be at this lovely literary festival. So thank you to everyone for listening. And until we meet in person,
Bye. See
bye.
you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.